My name's Keith Sacre. I'm a director at Barcham Trees. I'm also chairman of the UK Arboriculture Association. I also thought I was speaking for an hour today, so there's something like 76 slides there, which I've got to get through in 20 minutes, which is going to be a little bit difficult, so it's going to look more like a movie than it is a PowerPoint presentation. So we'll start off. So, pest and disease. And this is what we've got now. This is just a reflection: oak processionary, moth, ash dieback, massaria, horse chestnut leaf miner. Represents a very minor and very few of the problems we have now. So, what's to come? Asian longhorn beetle, emerald ash borer, Ceratocystis fimbriata, which is plain wilt, and they're all coming now. But Jeremy's just spoken about values. So to try and put this in some sort of perspective, let's have a look at this. Those are the species that are vulnerable to Asian longhorn beetle. And we're looking at London, and we're looking at the London Eye Tree report. So the implication of an infestation of Asian longhorn beetle is that. So I'm not going to read it out, but just digest the figure at the bottom and digest the percentage of London's tree population that will be affected. So let's have a look at ash, and we're going to look at emerald ash borer. There's one probably good factor in this, that when emerald ash borer gets here, there won't be any ash trees left because they all would have collapsed with ash dieback. But again, and you'll notice, I think that's the only representation of ash that we'll have is the ash tree pub, and I don't know where that was taken, but you can see where it's coming from. And the implications for London, should we lose our ash trees. And one more, London Plain. Here's the threat, North France. I went down to Italy year before last, and saw plain wilt and the sanitation measures and the felling. And it's a killer. The only way you can do anything about it is to fell it, but you only lose the infected tree. You have to lose to any adjacent trees that are plain because there's a risk of root infection. So you likely lose 2, 3 or more trees in any given avenue. And now the cost. And just have a look at that. Plain represents something like 9% of the total canopy cover, tree canopy cover of London. So that puts pest and disease maybe in context. But, and here's where the biosecurity element becomes quite important, when you begin to realise these are some of the others that are actually now present on mainland Europe and have the implication is these can all at some time infect the UK tree population. So here we are, a bit of audience involvement now. Don't look shock horror, I'm not going to single anybody out, but I'll single you out. No, I'm not, really. What I'm actually looking at is, can anybody in the audience who has any involvement in tree procurement, whether they're architects, designers, any involvement at all in tree procurement? So put your hands up if you have involvement in tree procurement in any way, shape or form. Come on, there's a lot of reticence here. That anywhere within the procurement chain. Okay, I'm going to come back to you guys and the rest of you with a statement at the end of this, but just have a look at this one. Okay, Xylella fastidiosa. There it is. Thanks to Henry Cupin at Terra Nostra for supplying the slides related to Xylella. There olives, that's in Italy. And there's the spread of the disease at the moment. The frightening thing there, fastidiosa multiplex is the variation that actually will impact on trees. But Xylella can be imported on lavender and a whole range of host plants. So Mrs. Miggins on her trip to Greece goes into a local Greece garden centre, decides to buy a lavender, whacks it in the boot of her car, comes back, Xylella is then in there. And the implications are huge. So let's have a look at it. There's some of the symptoms. I'm not going to go through all of this. So there's some of the symptoms, but there's the host species. So we come up with a host species list that's comparable to Asian longhorn beetle host species. So again, the implications, it really doesn't take a great deal of working out. So I was in Russia last year and I found myself in a city called Voronezh. Voronezh is the front line for emerald ash borer working its way west across Europe. It's really staggering to see the impact. Those are ash trees with emerald ash borer, die back in the crown but produce an enormous amount of epicormic growth because the borer can't actually live in the epicormic growth because it's not thick enough. So you have these trees where the crowns are just dying back and then you've got the epicormic growth. They are dead. But to see it on the front line, to actually be there, it's suddenly the impact becomes real. And the impact becomes real when you say that I then worked out that from leaving Voronezh to touching down at Heathrow was 4 hours flying time. And it was compounded the fact, standing in Voronezh High Street, if there is one, there was a lorry from Preston driving through. So that's how close it is. No point. And Andy Hirons comes from Preston, so this is not a pointer at Andy Hirons, and he wasn't actually driving the lorry. But, so for the tree nursery, that's my perspective. There's widespread recognition now that resilience of our tree population to pest and disease is built on the fact that we need diversity within our tree population. So we get asked for, and quite rightly, a whole series of different species which are not native to the UK. There they are, there's a few there. Tree population, the well-quoted Frank Santamore when he talks about the number of genus, species of family that you have present in your population. So, in the UK, can we handle it with native trees? And we're talking about the urban environment and we're talking about street trees and trees for the cities. We have 41 native species in our UK. There they are. Have a quick look at those. How many of those would make significant or useful urban street trees? I made it 4. So that's the resource we're working on if we say we're going to focus on native. Here's some things from iTree studies which Jeremy mentioned, and you're looking at the USA. Have a look at the dominance of individual species within tree populations. Some of the Scandinavian cities were showing that they were so dependent on lime, 47% of their population was lime-based. Now, have a look at the populations that you might be, and I think you'll find the same reliance on individual species within our urban tree population, which makes them vulnerable. So there's a conflict. There's a need for biosecurity. There's a need for the use of non-native species if we're going to make us have resilient tree populations. And there's a range of reasons why nurseries find it difficult to supply. Okay, here's a couple of shock horror ones that come along with Jeremy's. None of this has happened, so I don't want you going away from me neurotic this evening. But let's have a look. That well-known building in the background, Jeremy's talking about the impotence of our legislators. There's the building they're all impotent in. There's the trees. It's all right, I've got no personal experience of that, by the way. That's the same scene in the autumn, and we actually think, okay, relevance of trees, this is purely aesthetics. Have a look at the difference. And the difference is stark. So the current system is not working effectively. And that's a DEFRA quote from 2014. So what's happening? Jeremy and I worked with a load of colleagues putting together a British standard, BS 8545, published in 2014. This is the clause we wanted to put in. This was effectively saying quarantine. We couldn't get that in because we were putting out any new standard. It was deemed that we couldn't put anything in there that was liable to damage European free trade. So that didn't get into it. So here's where I'm coming back to the challenge. We've got a recognition that government is less than effective. We have a demand for a biosecure tree population. We know we can't be reliant on native species alone. So where do we go from there? And this is why I asked the question. Every one of us who's involved in tree procurement, planting, design, management is involved in this process. And every one of us at some stage will stand up and say, they are not doing anything. But the question I want you to take away and answer yourself, what can you do? Everyone who's involved in the procurement process can make a contribution to ensuring that our trees are biosecure. So, this is the Department of Health and Rural Affairs. This is a great lift forward for protecting plant health, a biosecurity strategy. Here's the UK Plant Health Information Portal. But here we are. The strategy makes clear threats to plant health is not just a matter for government. And here's the challenge coming out again. Death risk register. If you thought my list was frightening, just go in and have a look at the DEFRA list. It's not 900, it's 989. I'd already prepared this when I went back and checked. There's 989, that's close on 1,000 pests and diseases that are rated as being a threat to our plant materials in the UK, including trees. So, here we come back to individuals. This is Barcham Trees. Barcham Trees put out a policy that said, we will not import trees directly and send them out into the UK landscape. There's a copy of the document on the TDAG stand. If you're interested, please look at it. So here's again reinforcement, and this is the Barcham promo bit, which I can't avoid because they pay my salary. But here's the Arboricultural Association. The Arboricultural Association has put out a position statement. The position statement quite clearly states what they expect of their members in terms of biosecurity actions. Soon to be published, and I've seen this document, and it's really good. It talks about what is biosecurity, why it's important, how you manage tree populations with biosecurity in mind. Is it building resilience into tree population, the trade in plants and trees, and with lots of appendices and case studies? I would recommend it to you. Here's what arboricultural contractors approved by the association will have to demonstrate. Company-level biosecurity policy, include biosecurity in their risk assessments, provide equipment as appropriate, and appropriate training to all their staff. One London borough has entered a 4-year agreement with a nursery to grow in advance. So the trees, those alien trees, those non-indigenous trees that you require for resilience can be produced in a biosecure way on UK nurseries. So, here's the final bit. I think I'm in time, Jeremy. 10 minutes left. Good grief. So I'll go back to the beginning and I'll go through that once more for those of you that weren't actually listening. So here's what, maybe we can take a few questions here, because I think this is the key question. It's not what I stand up on a stand and rabbit on about. It's not what government does. It's not what organisations do. I know that if you as tree specifiers, tree procurers, tree managers, in your specification documents actually relate to biosecurity, you have the power to influence decision makers. You have the power to influence nurseries. You have the power to change it. The answer really does like this. So what I would really like to send you away with, really, the message, the take-home message, what can you do to actually contribute to UK tree biosecurity? There's the challenge, guys. So no, thanks for listening, and that's me done. So are there any questions that emerge immediately from that? No? Stunned you all into silence? Brilliant. Oh, there's a question.
There's someone's going to give you a...
I knew you were going to be a troublemaker right from the outset. It was clear on your face.
It's just a really short one, really. How did Sheffield get away with what they've done?
That would be more Jeremy's question. I'll offer you my thought. It seems to be an outcome of a, what do they call them, private partnership contracts. The public private contract is usually loaded so that the contractor makes all their investment in the early part of the contract and then the rewards of that contract towards the tail end. In this instance, the trees, as I understand it, there's an element of, if they make all the amendments and renovations to the road system early, then their later investment is very small. And one of the ways they can do that is by removing trees that are actually making minor or larger distortions in the built environment. So curb displacement, footpath displacement. But if they do that investment early, then they're like way we will reap the rewards of the contract later on. So, Jeremy, do you want to add to that?
Just a quick point. When you have the Secretary of State, so Michael Gove, goes to Sheffield and he says what's happening is bonkers. When you get somebody at that level in government saying that, you know something's seriously wrong with the system. The system is wrong, it's broken, it doesn't work. And that was my point, is that judicial review needs to have a legal basis to make a challenge to what local authorities are doing. And that doesn't really exist in a form that's effective. And Sheffield's proved that. The judicial review, the legal challenge wasn't successful and wasn't effective because we didn't have that backup commitment from the government in terms of a strong policy saying tree values should be factored into the decision-making process. And so that's what we will be asking for it to be done. And that's why we think government needs we need a national tree strategy so that across departments, through DEFRA, through Ministry of but I forgot.
Yeah.
Anyway, it was DCLG. It's not anymore. It's Ministry for Housing, MHCLG. Sorry. When we have these various departments, Department of Environment, Department of Transport as well, not really having a fixed plan and not really getting their act together and coordinating the way they deal with trees, we know there's a problem, and that's why we'll be going to them and saying, please think about this more carefully. They've made great progress in looking and recognising veteran trees and ancient trees, so we can't be critical from that point of view. But really, it needs to be a lot better. The point being, when you've got the bulk of the population live close to urban trees, and there is no strategy or policy to deal with that, no effective strategy or policy to deal with that, something's wrong and it needs to change. So that's what we'll be trying to say.
And moving on from there, is the way urban trees are not defined as an asset. And Jeremy mentioned iTree, and while it's not perfect, it actually makes a step to saying, okay, urban trees have an asset value. And as an asset, they ought to have an annual investment that actually maintains that asset. And again, this moves on. Why isn't the management of urban trees a statutory undertaking, given the benefits that urban trees, it's been demonstrated that they provide for people living in the urban environment? And again, Jeremy's quite right. It is 84% of the population now lives in the built environment. So any other questions? Thank you for that trouble-free question. Lady here. No, I was pointing at you. It's all right.
Hello. Hi.
Hello, I can hear you.
I'm Joe McGuire from Mott MacDonald. So we do a lot of highway projects, and obviously you say planning application, here's an area of native species trees. It happens all the time. It's sort of a standby. How would we talk to, say, the local authorities that we're planning for to try and get this kind of biodiversity, as you'd say, because they'd look at like carbon importing, you want to keep everything local. That's sort of what they're looking for.
Yeah, I mean the discussion around that is like endless. I mean, I went to talk to the Woodland Trust recently, and the Woodland Trust are actually now sort of moving into the urban area, quite rightly, excellent provision, but they were talking about the use of native species. And it's a misnomer. How native is this? Go and have a look at Docklands outside. You tell me how much nature is in there. we talk about soils in the urban environment. Have you ever dug a hole in a footpath? Probably not, because you get arrested. But you tell me whether soil is a consideration, because most of it is brick, rubble and clay in London and in other urban centres. So you have this, it's the question of resilience and whether you can make the case for resilience of your population. That's key. There's an awful lot of research material about it. There's some work that you may have heard Joanna Soman speaking this morning. Her partner, Omric Soman, has produced copious amounts of work about trees in the built environment and the hardiness of trees in the built and the resilience of trees in the built. I'm sure Andy will touch on it. So it's just making the case continuing.